The world believed that rights came from a king. The king, in turn, was handed down power simply by being born into a monarchy, certainly not by any achievement or merit. The king was sovereign and free. The rest of us, not so much. We were subjects. The founders flipped the script on this concept that had been accepted for literally thousands of years. They challenged the king and boldly proclaimed to the world that everybody else had it wrong. Rights come from God, not kings or government. This was truly revolutionary, and a war was fought over it against the number one superpower on the planet, and we won. We won, which of course was a big deal, but the founders also understood that unless we created something different, a government focused on protecting those rights and our national identity of freedom, we'd end up being just like everybody else. So, they brilliantly devised a system of separation of powers and federalism that would spread power out both vertically and horizontally, meant to protect individual liberty. In arguing for the adoption of the Constitution, Madison wrote in Federalist 48, "The accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary in the same hands, whether of one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the key definition of tyranny." He also notes in Federalist 47, "The preservation of liberty requires that the three great departments of power should be separate and distinct." In Federalist 51, Madison famously notes, "Ambition should be made to counteract ambition." The founders also created a republican, small or R, form of government, never tried before on this scale, and it made it accountable to the people. And the virtues of this form of government were certainly extolled in Madison's Federalist 10. The founders understood human nature. They knew that what tyranny looked like and understood that having a government where power is properly spread out and having elected representatives accountable to the people safeguarded liberty and freedom. They understood that freedom of speech and more broadly principles of pluralism were crucial to the survival of the republic. They also understood that a republic spread across a continent needed a pressure release valve to resolve political disputes, not through violence, as we see even in the world today, but through elections and free expression. It's in this vein I want to return to the two grave threats to the founders' vision, the principle of separation of powers, our republican form of government, and individual liberty, the administrative state, and attacks on free speech. First, the vast expansion of federal administrative power that we've seen in recent history is destroying representative government by placing immense power in the hands of the unelected. The Article I branch, the people's branch, is being diluted of its rightful role, willingly, I might add, and the power exerted by this class of experts is doing great damage to a government based on accountability. These unelected bureaucrats can issue rules, regulations, or guidance letters that can destroy people's lives and their liberty, and nobody ever elected these folks to anything. This massive aggregation of federal regulatory power is eating away at our freedoms, our liberties, deepening political division, and cheapening discourse, and it's completely antithetical to the vision that the founders had. It's called the administrative state. And it falls on each one of us here in the Article I branch in this time and place to fundamentally dismantle it. And when I say administrative state, I mean the mess of alphabet agencies that have slowly yet aggressively aggregated and amassed power over years, promulgating rules and regulations with reckless abandon. So you can send your elected representative home. You can send them there, you can send them back, you can send them home. But these so-called experts are not really accountable to anybody, ever. It's out of control. In short, it's a runaway train with an invisible conductor. If left unchecked, they'll continue to amass power bit by bit until our core principles and our liberties that make our country unique are a mere prologue to history. We need deep structural reform, and we need to return power back to where it belongs, in the hands of the Article I branch, the people's branch. A second major threat to the Republic is the unprecedented stifling of First Amendment rights in new, innovative, and modern ways. The freedom to speak your mind in the public square or virtual town square is vital to the health of the Republic. And far too many Americans are being told what they can say, what they can hear, and what they can see. Censorship Censorship is on the rise. The desire of governments and powerful elites to control speech is hardly new, but America has always stood as the exception. Long before the Revolutionary War, Americans witnessed the oppression of speech. More than 1,200 times before 1700, the British prosecuted and punished Americans for what they called seditious speech. Sedition laws prohibited criticism of the government based on the idea that that criticism could inflame the public against the government. But as the Revolutionary War approached, colonists began standing up for free speech. Colonial juries began refusing British requests to issue indictments for criticizing the government. They acquitted individuals accused of criticizing the government. They tossed tea into the harbor to protest taxes, and we printed publications denouncing the king. We were on our way. We, the American people, wanted to protect free expression of ideas, and we did so in the very first amendment to the Constitution. We protected it not just for peaceful times, but especially in times of crisis, or so-called emergencies. It's easy to forget how fortunate we are here in America to have the First Amendment and how terrifying it is to see how frequently now it's being violated. Recently, government actors colluded with big tech companies, some of the biggest companies and most powerful companies in the history of the world, to censor and deplatform individuals for not buying into the approved narrative. And whether you agree with that narrative or not is hardly the point. The point is, it's incredibly dangerous. Suppression of speech and censorship is justified now, as it has always been, but with a new lexicon, calling it misinformation or disinformation. But the goal is still the same: power and control. We saw the Department of Homeland Security recently attempt to set up an Orwellian disinformation governance board. We saw individuals silenced and suspended from platforms at the government's behest for challenging the validity of mask mandates and lockdowns, or for questioning the official narrative as the origins of COVID-19, for simply speaking their minds. It's not the government's job to tell us what we can hear or what we're supposed to believe. Each one of us can make those decisions ourselves, period. This vast censorship enterprise was at the behest of some of the highest-ranking government officials in the country. For example, the Surgeon General of the United States was messaging with senior Facebook executives demanding that they censor speech more stringently. Whatever your political persuasion is, this ought to scare the bejesus out of every American. Our government is supposed to be protecting our rights and liberties, not infringing upon them. And we have to ensure that this never happens again. As Justice Hugo Black wrote, the freedoms of the First Amendment must be accorded to the ideas we hate, or sooner or later they'll be denied to the ideas that we cherish. In short, we have to be willing to defend somebody's ability to say something we vehemently oppose. We must be willing to protect the rights of citizens to speak their mind, free from censorship, and fundamentally dismantle the administrative state. I mentioned that Missouri is at the crossroads of America, but in many ways, America itself is at a crossroads. It's up to us, in this chamber, the most important legislative body in the history of the world, to address these big issues that directly impact the people we serve. We need to fight back against this censorship industrial complex, from controlling what we can say and what we can hear. And we need to ensure that the great wall of the administrative state that separates the people from their elected representatives comes crumbling down. When I asked Missourians for their vote last fall, I promised them that I'd fight for them. And I believe that this is the fight. And the goal is to save our republic in this grand experiment of self-government. May God bless each one of you. May God bless the great state of Missouri. And may God bless the United States of America. Mr. President, I yield back.